Your daughter was a pawn. Your investigation was a setup, and the only way to save her now is to walk into a desert trap set by the man you thought you ruined." The silence in the dining room was thick enough to spread on toast. Across the mahogany table, my daughter, Clara, stared at me with eyes that held the cold, hard light of a 1,000-yard stare. She hadn't touched her wedding cake, the one I'd spent a small fortune on, the one that was supposed to be a symbol of her happiness. Instead, it sat there, a pristine, mocking monument to the chasm that had opened between us over the last 6 months. I don't understand how you could do this, Dad," she finally whispered, her voice dangerously flat. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. "You didn't just object to the marriage. You actively sabotaged it. You made Kevin look like a criminal. You bankrupted his family business with your investigation. And now he's gone. And you think this is a victory?" I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight, a sound that usually comforted me, but tonight felt judgmental. My heart was a stone in my chest, heavy with the truth I couldn't yet share. Clara was 28, brilliant, and until recently, impossibly naive when it came to matters of the heart and finance. She saw me as the overprotective father who couldn't let go. She didn't see the viper I had kept from her door. "Clara, look at me," I urged, trying to keep the desperation out of my tone. "I did what I had to do. I protected you." She laughed, a short, brittle sound devoid of humor. "Protected me? From what, Dad? From the man who loved me? The man who was going to give me the life I always dreamed of? You tore it all down because you couldn't stand him being better than you, richer than you, more connected than you." That stung. That. It always stung when she questioned my intentions. But this time, the accusation felt monumental because I knew the reality was so much uglier than her fantasy. Kevin hadn't been planning on giving her a life. He'd been planning a leveraged buyout of my life, using her as the primary asset. It wasn't about jealousy, Clara. It was about the fine print. It was about looking past the romance and seeing the numbers, I said, my voice steadying. I pulled a thick manila folder from beneath the table, sliding it toward her. "I didn't just run a background check. I hired forensic accountants. Open this." Clara hesitated, eyeing the folder like it was something venomous. "I don't want to see your dirty laundry, Dad. I don't care about Kevin's business dealings. I cared about us." "You need to care about this," I insisted, tapping the folder, "because if you don't look at what I found, you'll spend the next 20 years paying off debts you didn't even know you signed up for." Reluctantly, she pulled the folder closer. She flipped it open, scanning the top few documents, a summary of offshore accounts, a few murky property transfers tied to shell corporations, and then she stopped dead on a document that made her breath hitch. It was a prenuptial agreement, heavily redacted, but the key clauses were visible. She squinted, tracing the words with a trembling finger. This says I forfeit all claims to the family trust if the marriage dissolves within 5 years, regardless of fault," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "That's standard, isn't it?" "Keep reading," I pushed. She turned the page, her eyes widening as she reached the final addendum, a handwritten note scrawled in the margin, signed by Kevin, notarized a week before the engagement party. It wasn't about forfeiting her inheritance. It was about forfeiting mine. In the event of separation, the signatory Clara Hayes agrees to release any and all claims against the assets of Hayes Corp. in exchange for the immediate settlement of all pre-existing familial debts incurred by the signatory's parents, namely Jonathan Hayes. She read aloud, the words catching in her throat. She looked up, her face draining of color, the anger momentarily replaced by sheer bewilderment. Dad, what did you do? Kevin was going to take your company to save his mess? But why would he care about your debt? You're solvent. I stood up, walking to the window overlooking the manicured lawn where the guests were slowly, awkwardly dispersing. The truth felt too big, too poisonous to deliver over cold wedding cake. Clara, Kevin wasn't just marrying you for access to the trust fund. He was marrying you to settle a debt that wasn't mine, but one he convinced me to guarantee when I thought I was just helping a future son-in-law clean up some bad investments. The debt wasn't to a bank, Clara. It was to people who don't accept late payments. I turned back to her, my expression grim. The reason Kevin has vanished, the reason his family business dissolved overnight, and the reason you never saw those aggressive loan sharks again is because the debt was cleared when I handed over the original collateral. And that collateral wasn't money, Clara. It was the deed to the small lake house, the one your grandmother left you. Clara shot to her feet, knocking her chair backward with a loud scrape. No, you're lying. That house is mine. It's the only thing I have left from Grandma. You sold Grandma's lake house to cover some shady deal for Kevin? Before I could explain that I hadn't sold it, but rather had signed it over to satisfy the creditors, the front door buzzer sounded, a long, insistent tone that cut through the tense silence. I glanced at my watch. It was far too late for guests. I looked at Clara, whose eyes were now blazing with betrayal and fresh fury. "That's not the delivery company, Dad," she whispered, glancing toward the hallway, a horrible premonition dawning on her face. "Who is that?" I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. The debt was paid, the immediate danger averted. But I had forgotten one crucial detail. The loan sharks who bought the debt from the original holders weren't interested in real estate. They were interested in leverage. And I had just given them a very public, very distraught daughter as a new bargaining chip. The buzzer sounded again, more insistent this time, followed by a heavy, measured knock that rattled the antique door frame. I grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her toward the back kitchen entrance. "Dad, what is happening?" she demanded, fighting my grip. "They didn't just take the house, Clara," I muttered, pulling the heavy security bolt on the pantry door. "They took the right to collect from me, and I think they just came to collect the interest." The pantry smelled of stale flour and desperation. I shoved Clara ahead of me, my mind racing through escape routes that no longer felt viable in my own home. This house, built on decades of hard-won stability, suddenly felt like a fragile glass cage. The service exit leads to the rear garden shed, then over the back fence, I breathed, my voice tight. "We need to move, now." "The service exit? Dad, this isn't some movie. Who is that? If you saved me from Kevin, why are we running from your friends?" Clara yanked her arm free, standing her ground, her confusion curdling rapidly into righteous anger. "Tell me the truth, the whole truth about that ledger. I don't care if it hurts my feelings. I care if it puts us in danger." The second set of knocks hammered the front door, louder this time, less like a polite request and more like a physical assault on the wood. I could almost picture the veneer splintering under the force. "It is the whole truth, Clara. Kevin engineered the debt to look like a bad investment so that when I defaulted, I'd have to pay it off with your inheritance, your protection. I guaranteed the loan against the lake house knowing if he defaulted, I'd lose it. But those creditors," I lowered my voice to a harsh whisper, "they didn't want the house. They wanted me indebted to them. When I paid the loan off with the deed, I satisfied the debt, yes, but I also inadvertently validated their leverage against me. Leverage? Against who? You're Jonathan Hayes. You own half the city. I own what they let me own until I cross the wrong line, I snapped. And the line I crossed was refusing to launder money for the syndicate that held Kevin's original paper. Kevin wasn't just running a business. He was a mule for their operations, and I was supposed to become his clean, respectable guarantor. The front door shuddered again. A sickening crack echoed through the otherwise silent house. They weren't knocking anymore. They were forcing entry. "We don't have time for therapy, Clara. They think I'm trying to skip town with assets, and they've decided you are the perfect collateral to ensure I stay put and do their dirty work." I grabbed a heavy antique silver candelabra from a nearby shelf, a ridiculous weapon, but better than nothing, and gestured frantically toward the pantry's rear wall. "Go! Get through the service door. I'll give you a minute." Clara hesitated, her eyes darting between the reinforced pantry door and the hallway leading toward the sounds of imminent breach. She finally seemed to grasp the immediate physical threat, the veneer of her civilized life shattering completely. She turned, fumbling with the heavy brass latch of the service door. As she pulled the door open, revealing the narrow back hallway leading to the garden, we heard a new sound, the splintering of the main door's deadbolt giving way, followed by heavy, measured footsteps entering the foyer. Not just one man, two, maybe three. "Dad, come on," Clara urged, slipping into the dark corridor. I took a deep breath, positioning myself in the doorway, ready to draw their attention. "Go, don't stop for anything. Get to the neighbor's house. Call your lawyer, tell him everything I just told you. Use the word syndicate and stay there." "But I'm right behind you," I lied, knowing that if I left now, they'd just catch us both on the lawn. I needed to buy time, and the best way to do that was to meet the threat head-on, at least momentarily. Clara's face, illuminated briefly by the hall light, was pale but resolute. She nodded once, a flash of the strong woman I always hoped she'd become, and disappeared down the narrow passage. I waited until the footsteps rounded the corner into the main hall, the floorboards groaning under their weight. I tightened my grip on the candelabra, my knuckles turning white again. This was it. A massive silhouette filled the doorway, not the slick, professional enforcers I expected, but a mountain of a man wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit. He paused, assessing the empty dining room, before spotting me guarding the kitchen wing. "Mr. Hayes?" the man rumbled, his voice like gravel rolling down a hill. He didn't look angry. He looked mildly annoyed, like waiting for traffic. "We need to have a little chat about asset relocation. Your daughter seems to have misplaced something valuable when she left the premises." My blood ran cold. Clara didn't misplace anything. She's gone home. The man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He shifted his stance, and I finally noticed what he held tucked under his arm, something long and thin wrapped in dark cloth. "She took something with her, Mr. Hayes. Something we've been looking for since we arrived at the manor, a little flash drive tucked inside that hideous tulle monstrosity she was wearing. And that drive, we understand, contains the original audit files, the ones that detail exactly who signed off on those fraudulent transfers before you stepped in to clean up Kevin's mess." My breath hitched. The audit files. I'd assumed they were secure, locked in my study safe, but Clara, in her frantic packing before the wedding, must have grabbed the file I'd left on my desk, thinking it was just wedding insurance paperwork. She didn't just escape. She left with the evidence that could bring down the entire network and implicate me in the cover-up. "You won't get near her," I growled, raising the candelabra defensively. The big man sighed, looking truly disappointed now. He casually unwrapped the cloth from the object in his arm. It wasn't a gun. It was a very high-powered crossbow, the bolt already seated in the mechanism. "We don't need to get near her, Mr. Hayes," he said, leveling the weapon directly at my chest. "We just need to know where she's going. You see, we already know where the other safety deposit box is, the one that holds the bearer bonds. We just need the key, and that key is currently in your daughter's possession, hidden somewhere on her person, or perhaps taped to the back of that little drive. Tell us where she's running, or I start testing the tensile strength of this very expensive silver centerpiece against your ribs." The crossbow leveled at my sternum seemed to absorb all the available light in the room. The polished steel of the mechanism looked deceptively simple, yet it held the promise of instant, brutal finality. I saw the man's eyes, dead, professional, utterly uninterested in the moral fallout of his actions. "You underestimate my daughter," I managed, trying to inject defiance into my voice while simultaneously calculating the exact physics required to lunge the 5 feet separating us. It was a suicide move. The bolt would fly before I covered a quarter of the distance. "On the contrary, Mr. Hayes," the enforcer replied smoothly, his finger settling lightly against the trigger guard. "I understand her perfectly. She's running toward the one place she thinks she's safe, her childhood confidant. The problem is, we already swept the usual safe houses. We only need one piece of information to narrow the search grid considerably: the name of the lawyer she's going to call." My mind flashed to my conversation with Clara in the pantry. "Call your lawyer. Tell him everything. Use the word syndicate." I hadn't given her a specific name. I had left that choice up to her in her panic. But I knew which lawyer she would choose. The only one who knew my deeper financial entanglements, the only one I implicitly trusted to bury a body, or, in this case, evidence, without asking too many questions: Old Man Sterling. If I gave up Sterling's name, they would descend on his office like vultures, and Clara would be trapped before she could even explain the data on the drive. If I didn't talk, this man would likely make a very loud, very permanent scene in my kitchen. The tension in the pantry corridor where Clara had vanished was excruciating. I could hear the faint, frantic rustling as she presumably navigated the cramped space toward the garden shed. Every second I delayed was a second she was closer to freedom, or closer to being caught by any secondary sweep teams they might have stationed outside. "I haven't spoken to a lawyer," I lied, pushing the lie out like a shield. "She won't contact anyone until she's gone state lines." The enforcer didn't waste energy arguing. Instead, he made a subtle movement with his free hand, signaling toward the rear hallway. The message was clear. The primary threat was neutralized. Now it was time to confirm the secondary target. "A shame," he murmured, pulling his hand back slightly, adjusting his aim. "You see, Mr. Hayes, we have cameras everywhere, even in the garden shed. We saw her slip out the back. She's fast, but she's panicking. She's heading for the east fence line now, carrying incriminating evidence and a potentially explosive secret." My chest tightened with a fresh wave of panic, one that eclipsed the fear for my own life. He hadn't just guessed. He knew her route. They were watching the escape path. He was waiting for me to break so he could confirm Clara's location before she disappeared into the anonymity of the city. "If you tell me the name of the attorney," he repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr, "we let the girl go. We take you. We secure the drive and the bonds, and the slate is wiped clean for you. A life sentence in a federal facility is better than a shallow grave in your own backyard." This was the crux of the protection failing. I had shielded her from Kevin's predatory finances, but I had inadvertently armed her with evidence that made her far more valuable and vulnerable to a much more dangerous element. She was running not to safety, but directly into the crosshairs of people who saw human life as a disposable commodity. I looked past the man toward the dark gap of the pantry door, picturing Clara scrambling over the fence, the tool of her ruined wedding dress snagging on the wire. She was counting on me to buy her time, to hold the line. If I cracked now, she'd be caught at the fence line, the drive seized before she ever reached a phone. I focused on the crossbow, ignoring the plea echoing in my heart to save myself. "You won't touch her," I stated, my voice low and steady, finding a reserve of strength born purely from paternal rage. "If you lay a hand on Clara, I burn everything. The bonds, the digital records, the ledger entries. I've got remote access, you idiot. I'll brick the entire network before you can string that little bow." The enforcer paused, the tip of the bolt wavering almost imperceptibly. He clearly hadn't accounted for the scorched earth option. He stared at me, calculating the risk versus the reward. If the bonds, worth hundreds of millions, went up in digital smoke, his bosses would be furious. "A bluff," he scoffed, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his eyes. "Try me," I challenged, taking a single deliberate step forward. Suddenly, from the darkness of the pantry corridor, a piercing, terrified scream tore through the night air. Clara's scream, cut abruptly short by a heavy, muffled thud. The enforcer snapped his attention from me to the dark hallway, his professional composure finally cracking. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with alarm. "What was that?" he barked, lowering the crossbow slightly as he started to pivot toward the sound. And in that split second of distraction, I didn't lunge toward him. I kicked the heavy wooden utility table next to me, sending a cascade of iron pots and pans clattering across the tile floor directly behind the enforcer, creating a deafening, chaotic noise that masked my real action. I spun, ignoring the man's renewed focus on me, and bolted straight into the black abyss of the pantry corridor, screaming, "Clara!" I burst into the narrow hallway, the sound of pots and pans exploding behind me, acting as a desperate smokescreen. The scream had been real, agonizingly so, and it had clawed its way directly through the protective shell I'd built around my composure. The shock of the sound momentarily paralyzed the large enforcer in the dining room, buying me the precious few seconds I needed to reach the source of the noise. "Clara!" I roared again, stumbling past the swinging door leading to the garden entrance. The corridor was pitch black, smelling faintly of damp earth and fear. I fumbled blindly for the light switch, my fingers slick with sweat, my mind cycling through horrifying possibilities. Had the second man intercepted her at the shed? Had she tripped and fallen? My hand slapped against the cold wall and finally connected with the switch. Fluorescent light flickered violently, buzzing to life and illuminating the scene like a cheap horror film set. The service door stood wide open, creaking against the outer wall. The garden shed door, visible further down the short path, was also ajar. But Clara wasn't there. What was there, however, made my stomach turn over, threatening to eject the last few hours of adrenaline-fueled panic. On the floor, just beyond the threshold leading to the garden, lay a single ornate satin pump. The expensive one I'd bought her specifically for the wedding reception. It was scuffed, and tangled in the delicate lace of the ankle strap was a strip of white tulle from her dress. And next to the shoe, smeared across the concrete step leading down to the lawn, was a dark, glistening smear that was unmistakably blood. Not a cut. This looked like an impact wound. My heart seized. She hadn't made it over the fence. They had intercepted her here, right at the threshold of escape. The scream hadn't been a warning. It had been the sound of her capture. I spun back toward the dining room entrance, ready to fight the monstrous man with the crossbow, ready to die defending the life I had tried to save. But the dining room was empty. The heavy silver candelabra I had used as a diversion lay bent on the floor where I'd kicked the table. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic thump-thump of the enforcer's heavy footsteps retreating from the main foyer, fading out toward the front of the house. He hadn't waited. He'd heard the scream, realized his primary asset, Clara, was either apprehended or in deep trouble, and he'd prioritized the extraction over my elimination. The secondary objective had been secured. I dropped to my knees beside the bloody shoe, ignoring the sound of my own harsh, ragged breathing. My mind went blank, wiped clean of strategy, leaving only a primal need to follow. I pressed my hand onto the damp spot, the warmth of fresh horror. I had failed. I'd driven her away from the safety of the known, right into the hands of people who viewed human leverage as currency. Then, something pricked my palm. Beneath the thin, expensive material of the satin pump, my fingers brushed against something hard and small, wedged deep into the sole. It wasn't jewelry. It felt metallic and rigid. I snatched it out. It was a tiny, rolled-up slip of paper, sealed tightly with a piece of clear packing tape, the exact tape I used in my home office to secure sensitive documents for overnight courier. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely unroll it. It was Clara's familiar, looping handwriting, written fast, almost illegibly. Dad, not captured. Use the noise. Feigned fall. Drive is secure. Ran to Sterling's office. Use the back alley exit. They took the shoe as evidence of struggle. I'm sending you the location of the bond box now. Do not follow. They tracked the initial call. They think I'm running to you. I'm running to the key. Tell Sterling everything. I'm safe for now, but they have my burner phone. See you when the dust settles. Trust me. Tears blurred my vision, but this time they were tears of overwhelming, fragile relief. She hadn't been captured. She had orchestrated a magnificent, terrifying decoy. She had used my own diversion against the enemy. But just as the relief washed over me, a distinct high-pitched beep, beep, beep sounded from the pocket of the discarded wedding tuxedo jacket I'd thrown over a chair near the dining room entrance. It was the sound of a burner phone connecting to a network, a signal. Clara had said they had her burner phone, the one she'd been using secretly to communicate with me about Kevin. She'd dropped the shoe to imply capture, but she hadn't anticipated that they might have already tracked the phone she thought she'd discarded earlier. I snatched the jacket, frantically searching the pockets. There it was, the cheap, prepaid cell phone. The screen glowed with an incoming text message from an untraceable number. It wasn't from Clara. The message contained only a single, heavily encrypted satellite photo. It was a grainy image of a vast, empty stretch of desert highway, miles from any major city. At the bottom of the photo, stamped digitally in harsh red font, were the coordinates for a long-abandoned airstrip. And overlaid on the image, a chilling caption. The plane leaves in 1 hour. If the bonds are not placed in Box 4B at the Zurich Depository by 0600 Greenwich Mean Time, your daughter becomes part of the scenery at these coordinates. The desert image burned itself onto my retinas. Zurich. Bonds. 1 hour. The sheer audacity of the demand was breathtaking, but the threat against Clara, even the threat based on their assumption she was on the run and heading back toward me, was too immediate to ignore. They hadn't just captured Clara, they were tightening the net around every contingency plan I might have had. I looked down at the note in my hand, the one proving Clara was alive and heading to Sterling, and then at the cold, hard ultimatum on the burner phone. She was safe for the moment, playing her own dangerous game at the lawyer's office, but this new demand forced my hand. They believed I was still here, isolated, and the only way to save Clara was to cooperate with their impossible deadline. I ran back toward the dining room, snatching up the phone and my car keys. The enforcer was gone, having clearly decided that pursuing a potentially injured daughter was more productive than interrogating a disarmed father, especially with the promise of untold wealth hanging in the balance. He hadn't realized that by leaving me alive, he'd given me a critical window. I hit the speed dial for Sterling's private line, praying he was still awake and hadn't been compromised by Clara's unexpected visit. Sterling's voice was gravelly, laced with panic. "Jonathan? What in God's name is happening? Your daughter is here, babbling about offshore accounts and loan sharks. She's hysterical, and she just showed me a data drive that could unravel half of West Coast finance." Before I could calm her down, her phone pinged with a location, an airstrip, coordinates in Nevada. "Sterling, listen to me. You have to forget the data drive for 1 second. That's bait. They're forcing me to move the bearer bonds. Zurich, Box 4B. They think I'm coming to you for help getting out of the country." "And are you?" Sterling demanded, his professional cool finally shattered. "Not yet. I need you to do 2 things. First, secure Clara. Put her in the vault downstairs. Do not let her leave. Do not answer any calls, and block all outgoing traffic from her phone, especially the burner she used to send me that image. They think that phone is her link to me. I need them to think that link is active until I sever it. And the second thing?" Sterling's voice was tight with anticipation. "The second thing is the real plan. I need you to immediately initiate the Phoenix Protocol on Hayes Corp. Divert all liquid assets into the numbered Cayman accounts, the ones we set up for the actual emergency. I want the bonds moved electronically to the Zurich depository, but not into Box 4B. Wire them into Box 4C. Box 4B must remain empty, Sterling. It's a trap, and I'm walking straight into it." I could hear frantic movement in the background on Sterling's end, perhaps Clara being hustled downstairs. "You're going to the airstrip, aren't you, Jonathan? To meet them head on?" "I am," I confirmed, already halfway to my garage, stripping off my fine dinner jacket. I needed something less conspicuous than a tuxedo. "I am going to pay the ransom they demanded, but with the wrong currency. The bonds are worthless if they can't be cashed without alerting every international financial watchdog. Box 4B is empty because the bonds will be untraceable ghost assets in 4C by the time they check." I slammed the car door of my old, discreet black sedan, the one I kept specifically for unmarked travel, and pulled out of the driveway. The house felt eerily quiet behind me. Clara safe for now, behind layers of steel and legal protection. But Jonathan, if you deliver nothing, they won't just go after the bonds. They'll come after you, and then they'll come after Clara, knowing she has the real leverage. That data drive. They already think they have leverage, Sterling. They think Clara has the drive, and they think I'm running to pay them off. Let them think it until the last possible second. I hit the highway, pushing the sedan harder than I had in years, speeding toward the desolate coordinates flickering on the burner phone screen. The desert highway was dark, silent, and exactly the kind of isolated place where men like the enforcer felt most comfortable operating. As I approached the coordinates, a stretch of cracked asphalt ending abruptly in sand dunes, I saw a single powerful floodlight illuminating a sleek, private jet idling on the makeshift runway, and standing directly beneath the beam, waiting patiently, was the same massive enforcer from my dining room. He held no weapon this time. He simply stood by the boarding ramp, arms crossed, smiling thinly. I pulled the sedan to a screeching halt 50 yards away, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was deafening under the vast star-choked desert sky. I grabbed the only thing of value I had brought. Not the bonds, not the evidence, but a sturdy, locked aluminum briefcase I kept under the spare tire. It contained exactly what they wanted, or so they thought. I opened the briefcase. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a single thick bundle of neatly stacked, non-sequential, non-serialized $100 bills, all counterfeit. A decade of planning for this moment. I stepped out of the car, the heat of the desert instantly replacing the cool panic of the house. I started walking toward the light, every step a gamble. "Where is she?" I called out, my voice echoing in the vast emptiness. The enforcer didn't move, simply pointing a thumb toward the idling jet. "She's on board, Mr. Hayes, waiting for you to board so we can negotiate the handover. Bring the briefcase." I walked closer, the desert wind whipping dust around my ankles. I reached the edge of the floodlight's beam, pausing just outside its harsh glare. The bonds are in Zurich, Box 4C, already electronically tagged and ready to be frozen by my legal team the moment I miss my check-in window, I stated clearly. "The briefcase contains exactly the amount of cash you asked for, but it's worthless paper. Take it or leave it." The enforcer's calm finally broke. He took a single furious step toward me. "You think you can play games with us, Hayes? You think you can walk away from the syndicate?" "I'm not walking away," I corrected, stepping fully into the light, displaying the briefcase. "I'm paying the debt I owe for protecting my daughter. Now you get the money, you let her go, and you never come looking for me again. That's the deal. You can have the fake cash, or you can have nothing but a very angry federal prosecutor when Sterling blows the whistle on your money laundering operation in the morning." He hesitated, his massive frame tense, weighing the fraudulent cash against the potential total collapse of their network if I followed through with the Zurich freeze. The jet whirred impatiently behind him. Suddenly the enforcer snarled, abandoning the pretense of civility. He lunged for the briefcase, ripping it from my grasp. As his eyes dropped to the fake cash, he bellowed in rage. But it wasn't his rage that mattered. It was the sound that followed. The distinct high-pitched whine of an arrow being drawn taut, not from a crossbow, but from something much quieter, much faster, cutting through the desert air from the dark dunes behind the jet. The enforcer looked up, his face contorted in confusion, just as the arrow, tipped with a specialized high-velocity broadhead, struck him precisely where his cheap suit jacket met his collarbone. He didn't even have time to scream. He simply convulsed once, dropping the briefcase of counterfeit money, and collapsed into the sand. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs, looking toward the darkness from which the projectile came. The jet engine noise suddenly cut out, plunging the airstrip into near-total darkness, save for the harsh glare of the remaining floodlight. From the shadows near the wing of the grounded aircraft, a figure stepped into the light. Not a federal agent, not a rival syndicate member. It was Kevin. He wasn't ruined. He was leaner, harder, dressed in tactical gear I'd never seen him wear. And he was holding the bow. "You thought I was just a mule, Dad?" Kevin said, his voice now devoid of any charm, echoing coldly across the tarmac. I cleaned up my mess, and now I'm here to collect the real prize. The bonds were in Box 4B, Jonathan. Sterling was a pawn. Clara is safe, but she's on the plane, and she's flying straight into my lap. You just bought me 30 minutes of lead time. Now, where are those real Zurich codes?